You've probably heard someone say that if insects disappeared tomorrow, humans would only have 10 years to live. But this is just an exaggeration, albeit a somewhat understandable one given how important insects are for our survival. We need them as pollinators, as a source of food for other animals we eat, and in some cases directly as a source of nutrition. For people, they're also good for the ecosystem as decomposers and as predators of other animals, which might otherwise cause problems. But what if insects did disappear? Let's take a look at what would happen if they vanished today without insects. Our agricultural system would quickly fall apart. That's because many crops rely on insects for pollination. Globally, 75% of crops need insect pollinators. And in the US specifically, 80% of the crops we eat rely on them to some extent. This includes most fruits and vegetables and nuts. But also crops like cotton, coffee, and cocoa. If these crops weren't pollinated, they wouldn't produce, leading to widespread food shortages. It's true that some plants can self-pollinate, but for most plants that require cross-pollination, it's unlikely that we could replace insects soon enough to prevent massive crop failures. In fact, even if we tried to do it ourselves by hand, it would take over 100 million people to pollinate crops at the rate that insects currently do. And there aren't that many people on Earth right now. So there'd be no way to keep up with insect pollination without them. Even crops that don't require pollination still depend on insects for other reasons. For example, many of them rely on beetles to disperse their seeds. Insects are also a food source for lots of animals that we eat, including chickens, pigs, and cattle. They're a great source of protein for these animals, providing them with the nitrogen they need for muscle growth. Without insects, livestock would have to be fed more expensive protein sources like soybean meal, fish meal, or animal byproducts. So meat would become more expensive. But it isn't just livestock that depend on insects. Insects are a direct source of nutrition for humans, too. They're eaten in many countries, including China, Mexico, Thailand, and the US. There are hundreds of species of edible insects. Some are already commonly sold as snacks in places like the US, such as crickets and mealworms. Others, like bamboo, caterpillars, and cicadas, are often dried and ground into a powder used in traditional recipes. On average, 1 kilogram of edible insects contains more than twice the amount of protein than 1 kilogram of beef and almost 5 times the amount of iron. Plus, unlike beef production, insect farming doesn't require lots of land or water. It also produces far less greenhouse gas. So not only does eating insects provide us with essential nutrients, it's also a very sustainable way to get them. Even if we could somehow manage to replace insect pollination or find an alternative protein source for farm animals, insects still play an important role in the ecosystem. For example, dung beetles are essential for pastures in Australia. In South America, they feed on the dung of grazing animals and bury it, which helps remove parasites and weed seeds from the pastureland. They also fertilize the soil and mix it up, which improves its aeration and drainage. Removing insects would also allow populations of their prey to explode. Take, for example, the Colorado potato beetle, which, as its name suggests, feeds on potatoes. It's a major pest of this crop, and each female can lay around 1,000 eggs in its lifetime. Right now, it's kept under control by its predators, including birds, parasitic wasps, and of course, insects like the praying mantis. Without these guys, the Colorado potato beetle could seriously damage potato crops. And this is just one example. There are a lot of insects whose populations could explode without their insect predators. Take, for example, the American cockroach. These cockroaches can grow up to 5 centimeters long and they can fly. Unlike their German cousins, which can't, they're also resistant to extremely high levels of radiation. Their population explosion could affect ecosystems around the globe, especially since they tend to favor areas disturbed by human activity. which means they could become a common sight in our cities. And that's not all. Insect pests could also spread diseases that affect both humans and other animals. For instance, ticks can transmit Lyme disease to humans and encephalitis to horses, while mosquitoes can spread Zika, yellow fever, West Nile virus, and many others. Without insects that controlled their populations, these diseases could become much more widespread. So yes, life would go on if insects went extinct, but it wouldn't be easy. As we've seen, they're important for our survival in many ways. The consequences of their disappearance would go far beyond the loss of honey. So whoever said that was clearly an alarmist. But the news isn't entirely bad. A 2017 paper estimated that we'd be able to make it for at least a few decades without insects. But the real problem is that it's unclear whether or not insects would actually disappear all at once. Most worryingly, the same paper found that the probability of all these extinctions happening within a short time span is higher than we think. Climate change, habitat destruction, and pesticide use have caused insect populations to decline by 45% on average over the past 3 decades. And things will likely continue in this direction if we don't change our ways. So rather than thinking about what would happen if insects suddenly vanished, we should perhaps focus on what would happen if we lose them gradually, because unlike the sudden, hypothetical disappearance, this is something we might actually be able to see coming.